In this video, I have to add something in parentheses to the videos I'm making on the myth of Sisyphus just because I cannot resist. I can't help thinking of Durkheim. Durkheim had nothing to do with existentialism. He's commonly considered to be the father of sociology. In 1897, he published a book called Suicide. It's one of the most prominent books ever written on the subject. In his work, Durkheim offers us statistical data and a statistical approach to the phenomenon of suicide. As Camus points out, suicide is indeed an individual act, and you might even want to argue that it only affects you. But the fact is that suicide rate varies from culture to culture and country to country. As I've said previously, Camus thinks beginning to think is beginning to be undermined, and he adds, society has but little connection with such beginnings. That cannot be true. In societies such as, let's just say wherever communism or dictatorship rules, from the very early age, the encouragement to think is taken away from every individual. Occasionally, there might rise an individual who thinks for himself, but it doesn't happen very often. In other words, society can have a noticeable impact on your way of thinking. To put it in better words, society can postpone the beginning of your thinking indefinitely. Durkheim believes the phenomenon of suicide cannot be explained by its individual forms. From his studies, he concludes suicide falls under one of these categories: altruistic, anomic, egoistic. For instance, one of the factors which play a big role in this drama is integration. The higher the integration, the less likely you're gonna have an egoistic suicide. He writes, in France, on the eve of the revolution, the turmoil which shook society with the disintegration of the older social system took shape in a sudden rush of suicides mentioned by contemporary authors. He also sets up these propositions. Suicide varies inversely with the degree of integration of religious society. Suicide varies inversely with the degree of integration of domestic society. Suicide varies inversely with the degree of integration of political society. But bear in mind, according to Durkheim, the reason why religion preserves you from committing suicide is only because, and so far as it is a society, fear of God or hell isn't doing the trick. Not to mention the other means of self-destruction that religion advocates. I can't help but think of what Nietzsche said about Christianity and suicide. When Christianity came into existence, the inclination to suicide was very strong. Christianity turned it into a lever of its power. It allowed only two kinds of suicide, dressed them up with the highest dignity and the highest hopes, and forbade all others in a terrible manner. But martyrdom and the ascetic slow suicide were permitted. Also, where there is but little integration of the individual into family life, the more probable that someone will commit suicide. Education plays a mentionable role here too. This might be of interest to us, since education is connected with thinking, at least for most of us. The higher the education, the more likely you'll commit suicide. I remember one of my teachers in high school saying that suicide rate is an indicator of an intellectual society. Durkheim writes a sentence which is fortunately not true anymore. We have seen that in all the countries of the world, women commit suicide much less than men. They are also much less educated. Let's not forget that this book was written more than a century ago. However, as the data was shown at the time, one can recognize the role of education. That being said, the knowledge you possess won't make your path open to suicide by itself. Here Durkheim gives us the Jews as an example. He depicts Jewish people as educated people and very disinclined to suicide. And this is because of the special origin of the desire for knowledge. It is a general law that religious minorities, in order to protect themselves better against the hate to which they are exposed, or merely through a sort of emulation, try to surpass in knowledge the populations surrounding them. Here he is concluding that knowledge by itself has no influence upon a tradition in full vigor. It's possible to superimpose this intellectual life upon habitual routine with no reflect of the former upon the latter. In this case, intellectual development bears no relation to the number of voluntary deaths. It is because its origin and significance are not the usual ones. Suicidal tendency is great in educated circles. This is due to the weakening of traditional beliefs and to the state of moral individualism. Man seeks to learn and man kills himself because of the loss of cohesion in his religious society. He does not kill himself because of his learning. It is certainly not the learning he acquires that disorganizes religion, but the desire for knowledge wakens because religion becomes disorganized. Knowledge is not sought as a means to destroy accepted opinions, but because their destruction has commenced. To be sure, once knowledge exists, it may battle in its own name and in its own cause and set up as an antagonist to traditional sentiments.